Hi, in this video we will see what is the effect of pushing and pulling a slide film, Provia 100, and in particular the effect on the same image when underdeveloped by one stop, normally developed, or overdeveloped by one stop. This is how I conducted this test. I went out one day and despite the rain, pointed my camera at a subject and exposed 3 sheets of Provia 100 slide film. And I exposed the 3 sheets of film for exactly the same time because I wanted to see the effect of changing only one parameter, changing only the development procedure. The scene was a fairly low contrast scene with only about 3 stops of dynamic range that I exposed from zone 4 to zone 6. So essentially, if you're not familiar with the zone system, only one stop below and one stop above the average exposure. Looking at the transparency on the light table immediately shows the difference that the exposure time can make, but the difference is best seen after scanning the transparencies. These 3 scans were done with the exact same setting and same level adjustment in the scanner, so that to have more of an absolute comparison. These are the 3 images. They have been given same exposure time but different development. I asked the lab, which is Prowse Production in Rochester, New York, to give n-1, n, and n+1 development. I don't know if they achieved this by changing development time or by changing development temperature, but in any case they did a great job, and in fact it's really clear how this underdeveloped image looks very dark, and while going progressively to normal development or this overdevelopment, we go to brighter and brighter. And in fact in this n+1 development, we can see here in the histogram that some of the detail in the highlight is lost. So essentially this area of the image that was metering at about zone 6 is then looking overexposed when given this n+1 development. And this is not that surprising because of the limited dynamic range of slide film. In this case, when pushing the development, already this area exposed in zone 6 here looks overexposed. But maybe a more fair comparison is in this other file, where I compared the 3 different developments after leveling the levels. We can see that there is an effect on the color of the images. In particular, the underdeveloped one, n-1, to my eye has a very interesting combination of color. The reds are very saturated, while the green look a little bit muted. This can be seen better in the enlargement here. There is quite an interesting tonality, almost going to the blue in the greens, while the reds are here extremely saturated. Unfortunately, I don't have any blue in this image, so I cannot really talk about those. While going to n+1, instead the green are much more lush, and overall the saturation is lower. In any case, the contrast, and especially the local contrast, is really extremely high. I would say really insane. If we compare, for example, this leaf here in the n+1 case compared to the same leaf in the n-1 case, you can see that the local contrast is really high and there is these bright spots. So essentially my conclusion is that if the contrast is really low and you take care of not having anything above zone 5 or 5.5, an overexposure of n+1 can be used to really expand the contrast of an image, and in fact in this case it looks as if the image was shot in full sun, while instead the conditions were very dull. Instead, underdeveloping the film can be used to recover information from the highlights, but this is better explained in another video that I made that is linked up here. I made this little chart with the interpretation of the behavior of a slide film in reference with the zone system. I divided this sheet of paper into 9 zones, essentially from below zone 1, which is pure black, to above zone 9, which is pure white. When considering a paper photographic print, the dynamic range is defined as the values between zone 1 and zone 9. But if we consider the range of values that actually show some definite substance or texture, this range is narrower, between zone 2 and zone 8, which is defined as the textural range. Let's look now at the zone system values when exposing the film. This is what happens at the level of the latent image. The light meter, in this particular example, was reading an interval of only 3 stops between zone 4 for the shadows and zone 6 for the highlights. Both the metered shadow and highlight values, however, showed a well-defined texture, so they actually encompassed some more information with respect to what the light meter was reading. For the sake of this example, let's say that the complete range of recorded values falls between zone 3 and zone 7. Let's now look at how development can affect these values, for example in the case of n+1 development or overdevelopment of the film. The high value, the highlights, are pushed from zone 7 to a much higher value, let's say zone 8 or so. The low values, the shadows, are affected less. Finally, we take into account of the type of film stock. Transparency film is an inherently very contrasty substrate that expands the dynamic range of the recorded image. The shadows are deep and they fall to an even lower values, while the highlights are very bright and they are expanded to a higher value. So, by both pushing the film and by using a very contrasty type of film, which is light film, the dynamic range is massively expanded. To recap, let's follow what happens to the highlight values. In the phase of metering, the light meter reads zone 6. Since there is texture, the actual value of the highlights can encompass up to maybe zone 7. Due to overdevelopment, the highlights are further pushed to zone 8. Finally, because light film naturally increases contrast, their values is pushed all the way to zone 9, very close to the limit of what the film can record. The image, in fact, looks like it was overexposed, even if the meter was reading only zone 6 for the highlight.